That November dawn, while everyone slept, a blind Mare began running in desperate circles inside the stable. She couldn't see the water slowly rising beneath the door. She couldn't see the black sky torn apart by lightning. But she could feel something that no one else perceived. And in the next 4 hours, this creature that everyone called dead weight and a waste of money would do something that would bring a family to their knees, in tears, embracing in the middle of the mud. How could an animal that sees absolutely nothing manage to see what no human saw? Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. The sun burned mercilessly over the cattle auction that Saturday in July. The smell of fresh manure, mixed with the sweat of men in plaid shirts, filled the air. It was the kind of heat that makes dust stick to your skin, that turns your throat into sandpaper. Joe Mendez was 54 years old, with calloused hands from someone who has known the weight of a hoe since age 7, and a gaze that carried 2 decades of sleepless nights thinking about how to pay the next bill. His farm, 120 hectares of red earth in the interior of Minas Gerais, Brazil, was all that remained of 3 generations of work, and it was dying. The drought from 2 years ago had taken half the herd. The drop in milk prices had taken the other half. Now Joe was there to buy 3 heifers that could, maybe, start everything over again. That's when he saw her. In the last corral, separated from the other animals as if she carried a contagious disease, stood a Mare. She wasn't just any Mare, she was the most desolate creature Joe had ever seen in his entire life. Her coat, which must have once been a brilliant chestnut, was dull, stuck to the bones that jutted beneath her thin skin. Her ribs cast shadows on the sides of her gaunt body. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was her eyes, 2 milky spheres, empty, pointed at nowhere. The Mare was completely blind. "That one's free," said the auctioneer, a fat man who chewed tobacco and spat between words. "Actually, we'll pay someone to take her. 50 reais for whoever takes her out of here today. Nobody wants her, right? She's dead weight. Tomorrow she goes to slaughter." Joe felt something tighten in his chest. He couldn't explain what. Maybe it was the way the Mare kept her head held high, even without seeing anything. Maybe it was the silent dignity of that creature the world had discarded. "Where did she come from?" asked Joe. The auctioneer shrugged. "A bankrupt stud farm down south. Seems she was good at racing years ago. Then she went blind from an infection or something. The owner died and the widow didn't want anything to do with her. She was left abandoned in a pasture for months, eating weeds and rain." Joe approached the corral. The Mare turned her head in his direction, not to look at him, because she couldn't, but to hear him. Her ears rotated like antennas, capturing every step, every breath. "Hey there, girl," said Joe softly. The Mare whinnied. It was a weak, hoarse sound, but there was something in it, a question, a hope. Joe looked back. His wife, Dona Celia, was standing several meters away, arms crossed, wearing the expression he knew all too well. The expression that said, "Don't even think about it." "Shaw," she said, before he even opened his mouth. "We came to get heifers, productive heifers, not an animal that's good for nothing. I know, woman. We barely have money to feed ourselves. You want to bring another mouth? I know. She's blind, Joe. Blind. What are you going to do with a blind Mare?" John didn't answer, because he had no answer. All he had was that tightness in his chest and the irrational certainty that he needed to take that creature home. "How much do you want for her?" he asked the auctioneer. The man laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Mister, I just said, I'll give you 50 to take her." "No," said Joel. "How much do you want for her?" "For me to buy." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when everyone around thinks you've completely lost your mind. "You want to pay for her? How much?" The auctioneer scratched his belly, not understanding. "Look, if you really want her, 100 reais. But, mister, you're throwing money away." Joe pulled the bills from his pocket. 100 reais that would be missed. 100 reais that could have bought feed or medicine or a new pair of boots for his daughter, who was starting school in March. "Does she have a name?" asked Joel. "A name? Oh, I don't know. I think they called her Estrella or something like that, because of a white mark she had on her forehead. It disappeared a long time ago, the mark." Joe paid. He took the rope that held the Mare and began walking toward the truck. Donna Celia didn't say a word during the entire journey home. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. But the Mare, Estrella, did something strange during the trip. Instead of thrashing in fear, as most horses do during transport, she stayed absolutely still, quiet, as if she knew, in some impossible way, that she was going home. The first weeks were difficult, more difficult than Joe had imagined. Estrella stumbled over everything, hit her head on fences, fell into holes. Once she got stuck in the pond almost up to her neck, and Joe had to wade into the freezing water at dawn to pull her out. The neighbors laughed behind their backs. The children, Marcos, 19 years old, and Lucia, 13, didn't understand their father's obsession. "Why did you bring her, Dad?" asked Lucia one night while helping her mother wash dishes. "She doesn't do anything. She just eats and causes trouble." Joe was sitting on the porch, looking at the stable where Estrella was lying down. "Do you remember your grandfather, daughter?" "Sort of. He died when I was 6. He went blind in the last 2 years of his life. Diabetes. Almost everyone in town thought we should have put him in a nursing home. Why take care of an old man who can't see?" they asked. "But your grandmother took care of him until the last day. Do you know what she used to say?" Lucia shook her head. "She said that eyes aren't the only way to see. That sometimes those who can't see the outside world can see what's inside much better." It was that week that something began to change. Estrella, slowly, learned to move around the farm. Not with her eyes, but with something else. She memorized the steps, counted the distances, felt the changes in the ground beneath her hooves, heard things that no one else heard. And that's when the family began to notice something strange. Whenever one of the cows was about to give birth, Estrella would become agitated hours before. When a storm approached, even if the sky was still clear, she would move toward the stable. When the farm dog had a sick puppy that died during the night, Estrella stood beside the body until dawn, as if keeping vigil. "She knows things," said Marcos one afternoon, astonished. "Dad, it's like she can feel what's going to happen." Joe nodded without surprise. "Sometimes when you lose one sense, the others become stronger. But it's not just that. I think she always had this inside her. It's just that before, when she could see, she didn't pay attention." Months passed. Estrella gained weight. Her coat recovered some of its lost shine. She became part of the farm, not a useful part in the traditional sense, but a presence, a silent guardian who seemed to always be alert to something that others couldn't perceive. Until November arrived, and with November came the rains. The meteorologists had gotten it badly wrong. The forecast said moderate rains, maybe some isolated storms. What came was different. What came was a low-pressure system that parked over the region like a sentence, dumping water without stopping for 5 consecutive days. On the third day, the river that ran 6 kilometers from Joe's farm began to overflow. On the fourth day, the rural roads transformed into rivers of mud. On the fifth day, the municipal dam, the one everyone said was safe, that had been built 40 years ago, began to leak. But no one knew this yet. No one except Estrella. It was on the night of the fourth day that she began acting strangely. Joe woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of hooves pounding hard against the wooden stable. When he turned on the light, he saw Estrella spinning in circles, whinnying, throwing her body against the walls. "Easy, girl, easy," he said, entering the stable drenched with rain. "What's wrong? Is it the thunder? Are you scared of the thunder?" But it wasn't fear. Joe knew horse fear. Fear makes an animal freeze or flee. What Estrella was doing was different. She was trying to communicate something, trying to warn. She stopped spinning when Joe approached. She turned her blind head in his direction. And then she did something she had never done before. She bit the sleeve of his shirt hard and pulled. "Hey!" Joe stepped back. "What's gotten into you?" Estrella whinnied. A sharp, desperate sound, and she bit his shirt again and pulled again. "You want me to go somewhere?" The Mare stomped her hooves on the ground. Once, twice. Joe felt a shiver run up his spine. Years of rural life had taught him to respect animal instincts. Cows that refused to enter a pasture where snakes were hidden. Dogs that barked at nothing visible, only for a landslide to happen there hours later. But this was different. This was a blind Mare trying to take him somewhere. "All right," said Joe, his voice trembling. "Let's see what you want to show me." He opened the stable door. The rain was falling so hard that visibility was almost zero. Ironic, considering he was following an animal that couldn't see anything. Estrella went ahead, walking with impossible confidence. She knew that farm better than anyone. She had memorized every stone, every slope, every puddle. She went straight to the east pasture. The pasture where Joe kept the main herd, 32 head of cattle that represented everything his family had. And that's when Joe saw it. In the darkness, illuminated only by sparse lightning, he saw the water, not rainwater. Another kind of water. Water that shouldn't be there. Water that was bubbling up from the ground as if the earth itself was bleeding. "My God," he whispered. The pond on the neighboring property. 3 kilometers uphill. It must have burst without anyone knowing, and the water was coming down, slowly soaking the soil, transforming the pasture into a trap. Joe looked at the cattle. The cows were standing there, placidly chewing the wet grass, not realizing that the water was already lapping at their hooves. They didn't understand. They had no way to understand, but Estrella knew. Somehow that blind Mare had sensed the change in air pressure, or heard the distant sound of water moving, or felt the vibration in the ground, and she had awakened her owner to warn him. "Celia," shouted Joe, running back to the house. "Marcos! Lucia! Wake up now!" The next few minutes were a chaos of shouts, flashlights swinging, boots sinking into mud. Donna Celia, in her nightgown, trying to understand what was happening. Marcos, shirtless, running to open the gates. Lucia, crying in fear, hugging the dog. And in the middle of all this, Estrella. The blind Mare positioned herself behind the herd and began doing something extraordinary. She started pushing them, nipping at them, running after them, whinnying, forcing them to move. "She's herding the cattle," shouted Marcos, incredulous. "Dad, she's herding the cattle." It was true. Without seeing absolutely anything, guided only by sound and instinct, Estrella was doing the work of 3 cowboys. The cows, confused and frightened, began running in the direction she indicated, uphill to higher ground, away from the rising water. Joe worked side by side with her, opening gates, shouting, waving a flashlight. But it was Estrella who commanded. It was she who knew where to go. When the last cow crossed the gate to the high pasture, the water in the east pasture was already knee-deep. If they had delayed 10 more minutes, Joel couldn't complete the thought. He fell to his knees in the mud, the rain beating on his face, and wept. Estrella approached him. She pressed her muzzle against his shoulder, and stayed there, standing still, breathing heavily, while the storm raged around them. But the night wasn't over yet, and the worst was still to come. At 5 in the morning, when the first gray lights of dawn began to tear through the sky, Jaffe realized the situation was much worse than he had imagined. The water kept rising. It wasn't just the neighbor's pond. A municipal dam, the one that was 20 kilometers upriver, had burst during the night. A wall of water was descending through the valley, swallowing everything in its path. The news came through the radio. Between static and desperation, the immediate evacuation of all rural properties below the 300-meter elevation. I repeat, immediate evacuation. Joe's farm sat at the 280-meter elevation. "We have to leave," he said, his voice firm despite the fear. "Now, and the cattle?" asked Donna Celia. "The cattle we just saved?" Joe looked at the high pasture where the 32 head of cattle were huddled together, nervous, mooing. The high pasture sat at the 310-meter elevation. They would be safe there. But to reach the main road, the only escape route, the family needed to cross the floodplain, which was already completely flooded. "The truck won't make it through," said Marcos, who had gone to check. "Water's already past the exhaust." "Then we go on foot," said Joa. "We know a path through the hills. The hillside is waterlogged. There could be a landslide at any moment." It was a trap. They were surrounded. Water ahead, the danger of landslides behind, and an entire family needing to reach safety. That's when Lucia, the youngest, said something that would change everything. "Dad, what if Estrella knows a way?" Joel looked at his daughter, looked at the blind Mare, who was standing in the middle of the yard, her ears rotating, her head raised as if listening to something very distant. It was madness. It was complete and absolute madness to trust the family's lives to an animal that couldn't see anything. But Joe remembered everything that had happened in the last few hours. He remembered how Estrella had awakened him, how she had heard of the cattle, how she seemed to know impossible things. "She knows this land better than any of us," he said finally. "She spent months walking every inch of it, memorizing it with her other senses." Donna Celia was pale. "Aja, are you suggesting we follow a blind Mare through a flood?" "I'm suggesting we trust her. The way she trusted me when I brought her home. The silence that followed was heavy, wet, full of fear. It was Marcos who broke it." "I'll go," he said, tying his boots. "If Dad trusts her, I trust her." Lucia stood up. "I'm going too." Donna Celia looked at her husband, at her children, at the blind Mare waiting patiently in the middle of the rain. "May God help us," she murmured, "because if we die, I'm going to haunt you for the rest of eternity." Joe Mendez. The journey that followed was the most terrifying thing that family had ever experienced. Estrella went first, walking slowly, testing each step before placing her hoof down firmly. Joe came right behind, holding a rope tied around the Mare's neck. Then Donna Celia, then Lucia. Last, Marcos looking back every 10 seconds. Water was everywhere. Muddy, freezing, full of debris. Branches floated past. Dead animals. Pieces of fencing. The sound was deafening. A constant roar of nature that had decided to remind humans who was really in charge. Estrella didn't hesitate. She followed a path that none of them knew. She avoided areas where the ground was giving way. She stopped abruptly at points where, seconds later, trees fell. She changed direction when the current became too strong. "How does she know?" whispered Lucia at some point. "How does she know?" No one answered, because no one understood. There was a moment when Estrella stopped completely, refused to take another step. Ja pulled the rope, insisted, almost screamed in frustration, but the Mare wouldn't move. 5 seconds later, a section of the embankment ahead collapsed, taking meters of earth and trees into the water. If they had continued, Joe hugged Estrella's neck and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The crossing took 2 hours. 2 hours of terror, of faith, of a tense silence, broken only by the sound of rain and heavy breathing. And then, like a miracle, they arrived. The main road. Higher ground, dry, safe. A civil defense truck was parked there, picking up families who had managed to escape. A firefighter ran toward them, shouting questions, offering blankets. "Where did you come from?" he asked, incredulous. "The route through the valley is completely submerged." Joe needed a moment to find his voice. "We came another way." "What other way?" "There is no other safe way." Joe looked at Estrella. The Mare was standing still, her legs trembling with exhaustion, her soaked coat stuck to her gaunt body. But her head was still held high, dignified, as if she knew exactly what she had done. "She brought us," said Joe. "Our Mare brought us." The firefighter looked at the animal, looked at the milky, blind eyes. "That Mare, she can't see." "No," said Joe, and for the first time since the night began he smiled. "She can't see, but she sees better than any of us." 3 days later, when the waters receded, Jao returned to the farm to see what remained. The stable had been destroyed. The house had a meter of mud on the first floor. The fences had been torn away, but the high pasture was still intact, and the 32 head of cattle were still there, alive, mooing with hunger, but alive. Joa fell to his knees in the middle of the destroyed yard and wept for the second time in a week. The story of Estrella spread, first among the neighbors, then throughout the municipality, then across the entire state. Journalists came, television cameras, people who wanted to see with their own eyes the miracle Mara. But Joe refused most of the interview. He didn't want to turn Estrella into a circus attraction. She wasn't a phenomenon to be exhibited. She was family. There was a moment, a few weeks later, when a reporter managed to ask a question that stayed with Ja'al forever. "Do you regret buying her? That day at the auction when everyone thought you were crazy?" Joe looked at Estrella, who was peacefully grazing on the freshly cleared land, blind as always, calm as always, present as always. "I didn't buy her," he said. "I was bought by her. She chose me. She knew that one day she would need to be here, on this farm with this family, and she waited until someone appeared who was capable of seeing beyond the eyes." The reporter frowned. "Do you really believe that?" Joe shrugged. "I don't know what I believe. I only know what I saw. A creature that everyone had discarded saved 36 lives, 32 cows, and 4 people. That's a fact. The rest is mystery. And some mysteries don't need to be explained. They just need to be respected." Estrella lived another 8 years after the flood. She died on a spring morning, lying beneath the shade of the mango tree she loved so much. Joao was beside her, holding her head in his lap when she took her last breath. They buried her at the highest point of the farm, the point from which, if she could see, she would see everything. The valley that was once flooded, the house that was rebuilt, the herd that grew and prospered. Joao had a wooden sign made to place on the grave. It read, "Here rests Estrella." She could not see the world, but the world was never so clearly seen. Thank you for guiding us through the darkness. To this day, when it rains hard in that region, Joa's children and grandchildren stop what they're doing and look toward the top of the hill where the sign still stands against time. And they swear, some of them swear, that on stormy nights you can hear the distant sound of hooves, a soft, steady sound, as if someone were still watching, as if someone were still guiding the lost ones home, through the rain, through the darkness, through everything that eyes cannot see.